They did not kill him quickly. Instead, his captors forced his jaws apart and poured molten gold down his throat. He burned alive from the inside out, his organs scorched by liquid metal, as his enemies watched with grim satisfaction. It was a death as extravagant and cruel as his life of greed itself. Marcus Crassus was the richest man in Rome, legendary for his wealth and ambition, and among the Republic's most powerful figures. As a member of Rome's first triumvirate, he stood alongside Julius Caesar and Pompey in shaping the Republic's fate. But his own fate would be far darker than imagined. All his wealth and power could not save Crassus from one of history's most gruesome ends. He sought military glory by attacking the mighty Eastern Empire of Parthia, but instead met a fate so horrifying it sent shockwaves of terror through Rome and became a legend of cruelty for generations to come. By the 50s BC, Crassus's influence in Rome was immense, but his pride was wounded. He ruled alongside Caesar and Pompey, yet watched as they won great military glories. Crassus, despite his riches, had no shining conquest to immortalize his name. To match his rivals, he needed a spectacular victory. Crassus was feared and envied in equal measure. He built his fortune by ruthless means, buying burning buildings for a pittance and rebuilding them for profit. No calamity was off limits if it could line his pockets with more gold. Rome whispered of his greed, but Crassus only hungered for more. Crassus's cruelty was equally legendary. Years before, after crushing Spartacus's slave revolt, he crucified 6,000 survivors along the Appian Way, crosses stretching for miles outside Rome. Many lingered alive for days as crows picked at them, a gruesome warning to all who dared defy Rome. In 53 BC, Crassus at last saw his chance for glory and riches, war against the Parthian Empire. Appointed governor of Syria, he raised 7 legions, 40,000 troops, for an unprovoked invasion of Parthia. He lusted after Parthia's fabled wealth, desperate to win a triumph worthy of his ambition. Crassus's war was met with dread. In Rome, a tribune named Aetius tried to bar him at the city gates, lighting a brazier and calling down a fearful curse in the names of gods upon Crassus for this reckless war. Romans believed no man escaped such curses, but Crassus marched on, blind to every omen. Crassus led his legions eastward into Parthia's deserts, confident of an easy victory. Ignoring advice to take a safer route, he drove 40,000 troops across arid plains under a merciless sun. Thirst and anxiety grew among his men, but Crassus pressed them onward, refusing to turn back. At Carrhae, a Parthian army of swift horse archers and armored lancers lay in wait, poised to strike. Their plan was to lure the Romans deep into the open, far from any water or escape. Crassus marched straight into that trap, and soon the desert sands would run red with Roman blood. The trap sprang shut under a blazing midday sun. Without warning, a thunder of war drums rolled across the plain, and the air filled with the hiss of arrows. On the horizon, thousands of Parthian horsemen appeared, armor flashing, circling the Roman legions like hungry wolves ready to feast. A rain of iron shafts thudded into shields and flesh. Men were skewered where they stood. One fell with an arrow through his eye. Another choked as a shaft pierced his throat. Screams filled the air. Within minutes, the legions were in disarray, pinned down and bleeding under an endless storm of arrows. Desperate to turn the tide, Crassus sent his son Publius galloping at the head of the Roman cavalry. Amazingly, the Parthians broke ranks and fled before the young commander's furious charge. Dust billowed as Publius chased them down. The Romans dared to hope this was victory at last. For a brief moment, Roman morale soared. But the Parthian retreat was a deadly ruse. Publius and his horsemen had chased too far from the main army. Suddenly, the Parthians wheeled around and fresh troops appeared, crashing into Publius's isolated force. He realized too late that they were surrounded. Publius and his men fought desperately, but they were outnumbered. Horses screamed and sand churned to mud with blood. One by one, Publius's comrades fell around him. Surrounded by Parthian lancers, Publius was knocked from his horse and run through by a spear. His brave stand ended in dust and gore. Back at the Roman camp, Crassus anxiously scanned the horizon for any sign of his son. Eventually, the Parthians returned across the plain, laughing and whooping in triumph. One horseman rode ahead of the others, brandishing a severed human head on the tip of his spear. As the rider drew near, a ripple of horror swept the Roman ranks. They saw whose head was skewered on the spear. It was Publius. Crassus stood frozen in agony at the sight of his son's remains. His hope collapsed, and a howl of despair rose from the Roman lines as the soldiers realized all was lost. Night fell over the carnage. Grief-stricken and defeated, Crassus tried to save the remnants of his army under cover of darkness. The Romans staggered through the desert night, leaving thousands of dead behind. But the Parthians hounded them relentlessly. By dawn, Crassus and the survivors were surrounded. At dawn, the Parthian general Serena offered to discuss terms. Crassus's battered troops demanded he accept. With no other choice, the grieving general reluctantly agreed to parley, desperate to save the last of his men. It was a trap. At the meeting, voices rose and tempers flared. Suddenly, Parthian soldiers lunged forward and grabbed Crassus. His officers drew swords to defend him, but they were cut down in an instant. Rome's richest man was now bound and at the mercy of his enemies, his fate sealed. The Parthians dragged Crassus away, tore off his armor, and forced him to his knees. A ring of soldiers gathered, eager to witness the Roman general's punishment. Their commander stood by with a cold smile. Bruised and bound, Crassus tried to look defiant, but fear flickered in his eyes. Crassus's captors prepared to deliver a punishment as extravagant as his greed. Some later stories say the Parthian commander smirked that if Crassus had thirsted for gold, then gold is what he would drink. The Romans in chains looked on in dread as their general's fate was sealed. At Serena's command, a great bronze cauldron was brought out. Soldiers heaped gold into the vessel and lit a roaring fire beneath it. Crassus was forced to watch as the precious metal slowly turned to liquid. He could feel the heat on his skin. This was only the beginning of his torment. And then came the final blow. Parthian soldiers wrenched Crassus's head back and pried his jaws open. One man raised a red-hot ladle brimming with molten gold from the cauldron. In a single merciless motion, they poured the glowing liquid down the Roman general's throat. Crassus's scream was inhuman, a shrill howl that quickly collapsed into a gurgle. The molten metal burned through his throat and lungs. Smoke hissed from his gaping mouth, carrying the stench of charred flesh. His body convulsed as the liquid gold cooked him from the inside out. Within minutes, it was over. The richest man in Rome lay dead, choking on molten gold. Crassus's charred corpse slumped forward, tendrils of smoke still rising from his gaping mouth. Around him, the Parthian soldiers erupted in triumphant cheers and cruel laughter at the ghastly spectacle. The Parthians did not stop at killing Crassus. They cut off his head and right hand as trophies. Legend says Crassus's head was later presented to King Oroda II during a royal banquet. In a grotesque spectacle, the severed head was used as a prop in a play to entertain the Parthian court. News of Crassus's annihilation sent shockwaves through Rome. An entire Roman army had been wiped out, and one of the Republic's highest leaders had met a grotesque end at enemy hands. The public was stunned and horrified by the fate of Crassus and his legions. Crassus's death shattered the fragile balance in Rome. With him gone, Pompey and Caesar soon turned on each other, and the Roman Republic slid into a civil war. The defeat at Carrhae went down as one of Rome's worst military disasters, an enduring humiliation at the hands of Parthia. For Parthia, Crassus's downfall was a cause for celebration. Rome had been dealt a stinging defeat, and the Eastern Empire was safe from Roman aggression, at least for a while. Many believe that Crassus's horrific fate would stand as a warning, deterring Rome from further invasion. Indeed, Rome hesitated to challenge Parthia again, but others argued such cruelty only inflamed Rome's hunger for revenge. Decades later, Roman legions returned to avenge Carrhae's humiliation. Crassus's ghastly end remains one of history's most brutal cautionary tales. It is a story of human greed and the extreme cruelty it can inspire. A conqueror driven by ambition met a punishment truly barbaric in its nature. His fate forces us to confront the darkest edges of vengeance and justice. Was Crassus's gruesome fate merely poetic justice for a life of avarice? Or does it show that even the mighty can fall victim to unimaginable cruelty? In the end, his story asks us to consider how far revenge and greed can spiral, and whether any human truly deserves such a horrific end. Thank you for watching this journey into the darkness of history. What do you think of Crassus's fate? Does any ambition or greed warrant such a punishment? Share your thoughts and let us know how this story made you feel. And if you thought this was horrifying, just wait until you hear about the man whose intestines were pulled out. Stay tuned for another dark tale from history. You won't believe the horrors that await.